The storm hit Long Island just after midnight, thunder rolling like the sound of judgment itself. Inside the Whitmore estate, a mansion of glass and arrogance, everything gleamed. Crystal chandeliers, silver cutlery, the smell of old money and newer cruelty. Madison Hale Whitmore, 7 months pregnant, stood trembling at the top of the marble staircase, her soft hand resting on her swollen belly. She had spent the evening praying for peace, for understanding. But instead, she got a verdict. Victoria Whitmore, her mother-in-law, the queen of this cold dynasty, stood before her in diamonds that could feed a village. "You've brought shame to our name, Madison," she hissed. "The Whitmores build legacies, not daughters. Our family needs a son." At the table below, her husband, Grant Whitmore, sat perfectly still, fingers tapping his whiskey glass. He didn't look at her. He didn't defend her. He just stared through her like she was air. Next to him, Chloe Reed, his new business consultant, smirked as though she'd already replaced her. The sight of her made Madison's chest tighten with rage and disbelief. "I'm carrying your child," Madison whispered. "A daughter," Victoria snapped, slamming her glass onto the table. "A useless one." The words sliced deeper than the storm outside. Chloe chuckled softly, her red lips curling. "Don't take it personally, sweetheart. Some women just aren't built to produce heirs." The servants froze. Nobody dared breathe. The air was thick with champagne and humiliation. Madison's voice cracked. "You can't mean this. You can't throw me out." Grant finally looked at her, cold, detached. "It's for the best. You can go back to wherever you came from. My lawyer will handle the divorce papers." Lightning flashed. Her knees buckled. "Back to where I came from?" she repeated, her tone trembling between heartbreak and disbelief. "You mean the world where people actually have hearts?" But Victoria's guards were already moving. The heavy oak doors creaked open, letting the wind scream through the grand hall. One of the guards grabbed Madison's suitcase, still packed from her prenatal appointment, and set it outside in the rain. Grant turned his head away. "You'll survive. Women like you always find a way." For a moment, Madison could barely see through her tears. Her hands shook as she clutched her belly. Then, Chloe leaned in close and whispered, "Don't slip on your way down the stairs, sweetheart. The Whitmores can't afford another scandal." The room erupted with polite laughter. Madison's body went rigid, her heart shattered, but not completely. Somewhere deep inside, something colder and stronger began to form. She lifted her chin, her voice was steady now. "You'll regret this." Victoria smirked, doubtful. Madison took one last look at the man she'd loved and walked out into the storm, barefoot, soaked, broken, and unknowingly walking toward a reckoning that would one day burn the Whitmore name to ashes. Her iPhone buzzed in her pocket. A single unread message. "If you ever need me, I'm still your father." She didn't know yet, but that text was about to change everything. The rain had turned to ice by the time Madison reached the highway. Her thin silk dress clung to her skin like punishment. The Whitmore mansion shrank behind her, glowing faintly in the distance like a monument to cruelty. Her heels slipped on the slick pavement as she struggled toward the nearest bus stop, one hand on her belly, the other shielding her face from the wind. Each breath came out as a small, white cloud, proof she was still alive, even if she wished she wasn't. Her phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with a single name. Dad. For a moment she hesitated. She hadn't called Alexander Hale in almost 3 years. Her father, the man she once believed cared more about Wall Street than his own daughter. The man whose silence had carved a permanent hollow inside her. But the memory of Chloe's smirk, Grant's cold stare, and Victoria's venomous voice pushed her to tap call. The line rang twice before a calm, deep voice answered. "Madison?" That single word cracked her open. She tried to speak, but only a sob came out. "Dad, they threw me out." Alexander didn't ask who, he didn't ask why. He simply said, "Where are you?" "Route 27, she whispered, trembling. "Near East Hampton." "Stay where you are," he said. "I'm coming." Madison sank onto a bench beneath a flickering streetlight. Minutes stretched into hours. She felt the baby kick and pressed her hand gently against her belly. "Don't worry, baby girl," she whispered. "We'll be okay." A pair of headlights cut through the rain. A black Mercedes S-Class rolled to a stop beside her. The door opened, and Alexander Hale stepped out. He was taller than she remembered, his hair silver at the temples, his presence commanding like a general surveying a battlefield. A driver hurried behind him with an umbrella, but Alexander waved him off and rushed to his daughter. The moment he saw her face, soaked, shaking, mascara streaked, his expression hardened. "Get in the car," he said quietly. "We're done with them." Inside the warmth of the Mercedes, Madison finally exhaled. Her father handed her a blanket. "Who did this?" "Grant," she whispered. "His family said I'm not worthy, that I failed them." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Failed them?" His voice was steel. "They're parasites, living off my goodwill and your silence." Madison turned to him, startled. "Your goodwill?" He looked straight ahead. "Carter Financial has been holding their credit line for 5 years. They've been borrowing under a shell company. They never knew I owned it." Madison blinked. "Dad, what are you saying?" He took her hand gently. "I'm saying they threw out the wrong woman, and they just declared war on the wrong family." The car cut through the city lights heading toward Manhattan. Madison leaned her head against the window, exhaustion pulling at her. But beneath the fatigue, something else stirred. A spark of defiance she hadn't felt in years. In her mind, she replayed every cruel word. "We don't raise daughters. You can go back to where you came from." Now she knew exactly where she came from. A bloodline that built empires, not just families. When they reached the Hale penthouse overlooking Park Avenue, Alexander helped her inside. The space was quiet, all glass and soft lighting. He guided her to the couch and knelt in front of her like a soldier before his queen. "You're safe now," he said softly. "Tomorrow we begin." Madison frowned. "Begin what?" Alexander looked up at her, his eyes cold as marble. "The dismantling of the Whitmores." Outside, thunder rumbled once more, but this time it sounded like applause. "By the time I'm done," he added, "they'll wish they never heard your name." Morning sunlight crept over the Manhattan skyline, turning the glass towers into pillars of fire. In a penthouse high above Park Avenue, Madison woke to the quiet hum of the city below. For a fleeting moment, she forgot where she was, until the faint ache in her chest reminded her of the night before. The Whitmores, the humiliation, the rain, her father. A soft knock came at the door. "Miss Hale?" A woman's calm voice. "Breakfast is ready." Madison sat up. The room was unfamiliar yet comforting. Warm tones, fresh flowers, and a view of Central Park that stretched like a dream. She walked to the kitchen, where a housekeeper had laid out coffee, fruit, and a croissant still steaming from the oven. Her father sat at the head of the table, reading the Wall Street Journal on his iPad. He looked up when she entered. "Sleep well?" he asked. "I think so," she said softly, sliding into the seat across from him. Alexander studied her face, her tired eyes, her trembling hands. "You don't need to be brave this morning, Maddie," she swallowed hard. "If I stop being brave, I'll fall apart." He nodded once, impressed by her resolve. "Then let's channel that bravery. The Whitmores thrive on image, not strength. They survive by feeding off illusion, and we're going to break that illusion." Madison frowned. "Dad, I don't want revenge. I just want my dignity back." Alexander leaned forward. "This isn't revenge, it's restoration. They used your silence to destroy you. Now you'll use the truth to destroy them." He tapped his screen, pulling up a file labeled Whitmore Holdings. Numbers filled the page. Financial statements, offshore pending lawsuits. Madison blinked. "You've been tracking them?" "For years," he said. "Their company is built on borrowed capital and thin ice. And their so-called empire stands because Carter Financial, the firm I own, keeps them liquid. Without my signature, they crumble." Madison stared at him in disbelief. "You could have stopped them before." He exhaled slowly. "I wanted you to live your own life. You chose love, and I respected that. But when they threw you out like garbage, they made it my business again." Silence hung between them. Finally, Madison whispered, "What happens now?" Alexander's gaze hardened. "Now, they meet the real Hale family." Meanwhile, across Long Island, chaos simmered behind the manicured hedges of the Whitmore estate. Victoria Whitmore sat at the breakfast table, sipping her espresso and scrolling through her tablet. "The press hasn't heard anything, has it?" she asked her assistant. "No, ma'am," the woman replied nervously. "But the Carter Financial credit renewal hasn't cleared yet. The board's concerned." Victoria waved a manicured hand. "They wouldn't dare delay us." But her son wasn't so calm. In the adjoining study, Grant paced like a trapped animal. "What if she tells her father?" he muttered to Chloe. "The man's a billionaire, for God's sake." Chloe arched a brow, swirling champagne in her glass. Relax, she looked terrified. She won't do anything. Women like her never fight back. Grant tried to believe her, but something gnawed at him. Back in Manhattan, Madison stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of her father's office, staring down at the city that had witnessed her humiliation. "They think I'm weak," she said quietly. Alexander placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then show them how dangerous weakness can be when it learns to fight." She turned to face him, eyes blazing with new determination. "Tell me what to do." A thin smile curved his lips. "First, we freeze their funding, then we let the world watch them fall." Outside, sirens echoed faintly through the streets, a fitting soundtrack for what was coming next. And far away, in the gilded halls of the Whitmore Empire, the first cracks began to form. Rain still clung to the edges of Madison's memory like a ghost, but today the sky above Manhattan was cruelly bright, blue, sharp, and merciless. She sat in her father's study, staring at a photo on her phone. It was a screenshot from social media, a post by Chloe Reed, tagged at the Whitmore estate. The caption read, "Some wins are worth celebrating early." There was Grant beside her, champagne in hand, the same smirk he'd worn the night he threw Madison out. Beneath the photo, hundreds of comments praised the perfect couple. The laughter behind that image was louder than thunder. Alexander looked up from his desk, where files and legal documents were stacked like ammunition. "You shouldn't look at that," he said. "I have to," Madison whispered. "I need to remember what it feels like." What feels like?" "Humiliation," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "Because when this is over, I want to feel the opposite." Alexander's eyes softened. He recognized the same fire he once had in his youth, the quiet, dangerous kind that built empires and destroyed tyrants. "Good," he murmured. "Then let's make sure their laughter is short-lived." That afternoon, Madison sat beside him as his team of attorneys and analysts filled the boardroom. On the glass wall behind them, the words Carter Financial Holdings reflected in gold. The men and women in suits looked at her with curiosity. She looked back with quiet authority. "This is my daughter," Alexander said, his tone leaving no room for condescension. "From now on, she oversees the Whitmore portfolio." A murmur rippled through the room. Madison tried to hide her surprise. "Dad, He lifted a hand. "You wanted your dignity back. Here's your chance." The chief legal officer cleared his throat. "Sir, the Whitmore's credit renewal is pending. We can stall it, but if we withdraw—" Alexander's gaze cut through him. "Withdraw it. Effective immediately." A silence heavy as stone settled over the room. Madison's heart thudded. "That will ruin them overnight," she whispered. Alexander looked straight at her. "Exactly." Hours later in East Hampton, Victoria, Whitmore's assistant, burst into the salon, pale-faced. "Mrs. Whitmore, the Carter funding, it's gone. The accounts are frozen." Victoria slammed her glass onto the table. "What do you mean, gone?" the woman stammered. "Carter Holdings has pulled out. Every partner bank is retracting. No one's lending. They say the credit risk is too high." Grant stormed in from the hallway, phone pressed to his ear. "They're bluffing. Carter wouldn't do that without warning." But then the voice on the other end confirmed it. Their lines of credit had been revoked. Millions gone. Chloe set down her flute of champagne, her smile faltering. "Maybe it's temporary?" Victoria's lips curled into a sneer. "That little brat's father, he's doing this." Grant's jaw tightened. "We underestimated her." Chloe forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. "You're overreacting. She doesn't have that kind of power." "Doesn't she?" Victoria snapped. "She has his blood." Meanwhile, back in Manhattan, Madison stood on the balcony of her father's penthouse, the city lights blazing beneath her. For the first time in months, she felt her breath steady. She wasn't just the cast-out wife anymore. She was something else now, something stronger. Her father joined her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Do you feel better?" he asked. Madison exhaled slowly. "Not yet, but it's a start." Far away, inside the Whitmore estate, Chloe stared at her phone. Madison's social profile had just gone public again. One simple post, one line of text. "You should have thought twice before laughing." And for the first time, Chloe Reed's perfect smile cracked. The city never truly slept, but at 2 a.m, Manhattan felt like another planet. Quiet, glittering, suspended between exhaustion and power. Madison sat alone in her father's glass-walled office, the skyline stretching endlessly beyond her. Every light in the city seemed alive, 1,000 tiny eyes watching her next move. She hadn't gone home since the funding freeze had hit the Whitmores. She couldn't sleep. Her thoughts kept circling back to the people who had laughed while throwing her out into the rain. On the massive mahogany desk lay folders filled with documents her father's team had compiled. Financial records, personal correspondences, even internal memos from Whitmore Holdings. She stared at them without really seeing, her fingers brushing the edge of a photo, her wedding day. Grant was smiling in the picture, his arm tight around her waist, his eyes gleaming with that mix of charm and arrogance that had once blinded her. Back then she'd thought it was confidence. Now she knew it was entitlement. Her father entered the office quietly, 2 steaming cups of coffee in hand. "Still awake?" he asked. Madison smiled faintly. "Barely." Alexander set a cup beside her. "You should rest. The next few days will get harder." She shook her head. "If I sleep, I'll dream about that night again." He studied her, then sat across the desk. "Do you regret calling me?" Madison hesitated, her throat tightening. "I regret marrying him. I regret trusting people who saw me as a tool. But calling you? No, Dad. I think it saved me." Alexander's gaze softened. "You've always been stronger than you think, Maddie. I just hate that it took this kind of cruelty for you to see it." A gust of wind rattled the window panes. Madison looked out at the river of headlights flowing down Park Avenue. "What happens next?" Alexander leaned back, his tone measured but sharp. "The freeze was step 1. Step 2 is exposure. Their empire isn't just weak financially, it's corrupt. They've been falsifying profit statements for years. Once that surfaces, the SEC will dismantle them brick by brick." Madison's eyes widened. "You're going to report them?" He gave a slight nod. "Under Carter Holdings' anonymous disclosure, no one will know it came from us." She felt her pulse quicken. "That's ruthless." Alexander's lips curved slightly. "No, that's justice." Down in East Hampton, chaos had turned to desperation. The Whitmores' estate, once humming with luxury, now buzzed with tension. Victoria had fired half the staff. Grant shouted into phones all day, threatening lawyers, begging investors. Chloe, usually draped across sofas in silk, now hovered nervously near the windows. "They'll fix this, right?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It can't all fall apart overnight." Grant snapped. "You don't understand how finance works." Chloe's eyes flashed. "No, Grant, you don't understand what you lost. Madison didn't just marry you. She connected you to her father's empire. Without that, you're nothing but another overleveraged CEO waiting to implode." Grant froze. "What did you just say?" But Chloe was already walking away, muttering, "You should have treated her better." Back in Manhattan, Madison closed her eyes, exhaustion finally settling in. For the first time since that horrible night, she felt a flicker of peace. The city lights painted her face in gold and silver hues as she whispered, "For my daughter. For every woman they've crushed." Alexander rose, watching her drift toward sleep on the office couch. He pulled a blanket over her shoulders and whispered, "Rest now. Tomorrow, the world begins to see who the Whitmores really are." Outside, the clock struck 3. Somewhere across the city, the first anonymous tip landed on a journalist's desk. And by sunrise, the Whitmore name would no longer shine. It would burn. By morning, Manhattan was washed in cold silver light. Madison woke to the faint hum of her father's espresso machine and the distant sound of rain hitting the tall windows. The city felt still, as if holding its breath. On the massive TV screen in the living room, the morning news anchors spoke in bright tones about politics and Wall Street, until one of them hesitated, touching her earpiece. "Breaking news," she said. "Whitmore Holdings faces an unexpected financial freeze this morning after a major investor pulled support. Stock down 24% at open." Madison froze mid-sip. "It's happening," she whispered. Her father looked up from his phone. "Good. That's only the beginning." Across Long Island, panic spread faster than the rain. At the Whitmore headquarters, a sleek tower of glass and lies, Grant stormed through the lobby, barking orders into his phone. "Call the bank again. Tell them Carter's decision was a clerical error." His assistant trailed behind, pale and trembling. "Sir, it's not just Carter Holdings. The smaller investors are pulling out too. They're afraid of exposure." Grant spun around, fury in his eyes. "Exposure to what?" The assistant swallowed hard. "Sir, there are rumors the company falsified reports to attract funding. For a moment, Grant's face turned white. He slammed his phone onto the marble floor, shattering it. "Get my lawyer." Meanwhile, Chloe scrolled through her phone in the executive lounge, her expression unreadable. On social media, whispers of the collapse had begun to trend. Under #Whitmore scandal, journalists speculated about questionable accounting and insider manipulation. Each tweet cut closer to the bone. Victoria burst into the room, her diamond earrings catching the light like shards of glass. "Grant," she shouted, "do you have any idea what this means? If Carter turns on us, we're finished." Grant rubbed his temples. "Mother, I'm handling it." "Handling it?" she snapped. "You've lost everything. Our contracts, our image, and our credibility. You can't even control your mistress." Chloe looked up sharply. "Excuse me?" Victoria sneered. "You think I don't know what you're here for, dear? You wanted a rich husband. Well, congratulations, you've picked the sinking one." Chloe's face went cold, but she said nothing. She just grabbed her bag and walked out, her heels clicking against the marble like a countdown. Back in Manhattan, Madison sat with her father's communications director, reviewing a draft statement. "It can't sound vindictive," she said softly. "I don't want to look like I'm gloating." The director nodded. "Understood. We'll keep it professional. Carter Holdings confirms withdrawal due to non-compliance and misrepresentation." Alexander entered, buttoning his suit jacket. "Ready?" Madison glanced at him, nerves flickering in her chest. "For what?" "For the next phase," he said. "Today we let the truth speak." By noon, major outlets had picked up the story. CNBC, The Wall Street Journal, and even lifestyle blogs ran the same headline. "Whitmore Holdings faces investigation for fraudulent filings. Carter Holdings cuts all ties." Grant watched it unfold from his office, rage twisting his features. He threw the remote at the screen, cracking it. "She did this," he snarled. "Madison did this." Downstairs, reporters gathered outside the Whitmore building. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. "Mr. Whitmore, is it true your wife's family orchestrated this? Did you falsify reports to secure funding?" Grant pushed through the chaos, muttering under his breath. "She'll regret this. I swear she will." But far above him, in the Carter penthouse, Madison watched the same coverage with a quiet, almost mournful expression. "It's strange," she said softly. "I thought I'd feel happy." Alexander set down his coffee. "Justice isn't joy, Madison. It's closure." She turned to the window, her reflection merging with the storm outside. "Then I'm ready for the next step." Her father gave a thin smile. "Then tomorrow, we end them publicly." And somewhere in the city, a headline editor drafted the next day's story. One that would make the Whitmores wish they'd never left. The next morning dawned gray and restless, the kind of New York day when the clouds hung low enough to touch the skyscrapers. Madison stood in front of the full-length mirror inside her father's penthouse bedroom. For the first time in months, she looked at herself not as a victim, but as a woman reborn. The bruises left by betrayal had faded, replaced by quiet determination. She smoothed her hands over the black blazer that once belonged to her mother, a woman who had built her own legacy beside Alexander Hale before her untimely death. Behind her, the bedroom door opened. Alexander entered, his tie perfectly knotted, his presence sharp as steel. "You ready?" he asked. Madison turned. "For what?" "For the board meeting," he said. "You're coming with me." She blinked. "I can't. I'm not part of Carter Holdings." Alexander's voice was calm but firm. "You are now." He handed her a slim folder embossed with gold lettering. Carter Holdings, Board of Directors. Beneath her name, in clean black ink, was a title that made her breath hitch. Vice President of Corporate Ethics and Compliance. Her fingers trembled as she traced the words. "Dad, why?" "Because optics matter," he said. "They threw out a pregnant woman like she was nothing. Now, the world will see that woman standing beside me when I make the announcement that destroys them." An hour later, the elevator doors opened into the Carter Holdings executive floor. The air smelled of espresso, ambition, and quiet fear. Every employee turned to look as Alexander walked through the glass corridor with his daughter beside him. She could feel their eyes, curiosity mixed with awe. The boardroom was sleek and cold, the city skyline stretching behind it like a stage. Madison took her seat at her father's right. He adjusted his cufflinks, looked around the table, and said simply, "Gentlemen, it's time to make our move." A slide appeared on the screen. "Whitmore Holdings, Preliminary Audit Findings." One by one, Carter's analysts presented evidence: misreported earnings, hidden accounts, falsified invoices. The data was irrefutable. By the end of the presentation, no one spoke. Alexander leaned back, his tone almost casual. "Once we hand this over to federal authorities, Whitmore Holdings will collapse within 48 hours. One board member cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, that could trigger a market ripple. The Whitmores still hold minor stakes in our coastal logistics projects." Alexander's gaze cut through him like glass. "Not for long. Pull everything connected to them." Then he turned to Madison. "Would you like to add anything?" For a second, she froze. Then she stood, her voice quiet but steady. "The Whitmores taught me something important," she began. "They taught me how easily cruelty hides behind wealth, how greed dresses itself in respectability. But they forgot one thing: power built on injustice never lasts." A murmur of approval rippled through the room. Madison sat down, her pulse racing. Her father's proud smile was small but unmistakable. Meanwhile, across Long Island, Victoria Whitmore was on the phone with her legal team. "Stop this story before it spreads," she barked. "We can't afford an investigation." But the attorney's voice was grim. "It's too late, Mrs. Whitmore. Carter Holdings has already submitted the audit to the SEC. They're untouchable." Victoria's hand shook as she ended the call. Grant entered, his face ashen. "Mother, what did they do?" She looked at him, her composure cracking. "They exposed everything. We're finished." Grant sank into a chair, disbelief painted across his face. "She's really doing this. Madison's behind it all." Victoria's tone was sharp as broken glass. "No. Her father is. She's just his weapon." But deep inside, Victoria was wrong. Madison wasn't anyone's weapon anymore. She was fire forged by betrayal, burning on her own terms. And tomorrow the entire city would watch her rise from the ashes the Whitmores tried to bury her in. That night, Manhattan pulsed with electricity. Bright lights, honking cabs, and the restless hum of people chasing power. Madison stood by the window of her father's penthouse, her reflection caught between the city and the storm within her. The news networks were still ablaze with coverage of the Whitmore downfall. Financial reporters spoke in urgent tones about fraud, collapsed shares, and lawsuits. Each headline carried her father's company name beside the Whitmores, as if destiny had scripted their collision. But Madison didn't feel victorious. She felt haunted. She wrapped a cashmere shawl around her shoulders and stared at the skyline. "Dad?" she whispered as Alexander approached behind her. "What happens after they fall?" He studied her quietly. "After?" He poured 2 glasses of red wine, handing her one. "After, we rebuild. We make sure no one ever treats you or your daughter like property again." Madison's hand rested on her stomach, feeling the faint flutter of life. "She kicked again," she said softly. Alexander's voice broke its usual steel. "That's good. She's strong, just like her mother." Madison smiled faintly, maybe stronger. But strength came with its cost. She could already feel the whispers starting. Online forums, gossip blogs, business tabloids labeling her the billionaire's avenging daughter. The public loved a scandal, but loved tearing down women even more. Madison knew what was coming next: scrutiny, speculation, and judgment disguised as journalism. "I need to do something," she said suddenly. "Something for myself." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" She hesitated. "Go back to work." He blinked. "Work? I trained as a neonatal nurse before marrying Grant," she said. "I miss helping people. Real people. Not just headlines." Alexander's expression softened into pride. "If that's what you want, you'll have my full support. But don't let guilt pull you away from justice. The Whitmores aren't done yet." Madison nodded, though part of her hoped they were. Meanwhile, inside a dark penthouse across the East River, Grant Whitmore was anything but finished. He sat surrounded by empty whiskey glasses, eyes red, tie loosened, his empire in ruins. The flickering television replayed a news segment about the investigation. Every few seconds, Madison's photo appeared beside his, her calm, composed face a mirror to his collapse. "She ruined me," he muttered. "That woman and her father." Chloe, sitting across from him in silence, finally spoke. "No, Grant, you ruined yourself." He glared at her. "You think I don't know you enjoyed this? Waiting for me to fall so you could run to the next billionaire?" Chloe rose slowly. "I made a mistake, yes. But at least I didn't destroy a pregnant woman for pride." She paused at the door. "You should know. People are starting to talk. The SEC isn't your only problem." he frowned. What do you mean? She looked back. The press has an anonymous source leaking every ugly thing you've ever done. And with that, she left him alone in the flickering glow of his own downfall. Back in Manhattan, Madison scrolled through her phone one last time before bed. Her inbox was flooded. Messages from reporters, old friends, even women she'd never met. Some called her brave, others called her ruthless. She sighed and turned off the screen. They can call me whatever they want, she whispered, as long as my daughter grows up free. Her father's voice came from the hallway. Tomorrow's the gala. Remember, you don't owe anyone forgiveness. Madison nodded. I'm not going there to forgive. Then why go? She looked at him, her eyes steady. Because the woman they threw away is gone. I want them to see the one they created instead. And when Madison Hale walked into that ballroom, the world would realize the victim had become the reckoning. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel glittered like a jewel that night, drenched in golden light and arrogance. It was the annual Metropolitan Investors Gala, an event where Manhattan's elite came to toast themselves and whisper about power. Every chandelier shimmered with old money. Waiters in white gloves floated through the crowd carrying champagne that cost more than most people's rent. Grant Whitmore arrived late, but he made sure everyone noticed. His tuxedo was immaculate, his smile calculated, and at his side was Chloe Reed, her red gown clinging to her like sin. The whispers started the moment they stepped through the marble archway. Some murmured about the investigation, others smirked about Madison. Grant heard it all but pretended not to care. We'll make a statement tonight, he told Chloe through gritted teeth. They think they can destroy me. I'll show them I'm still standing. Chloe forced a smile, though her eyes darted nervously toward the cameras. Just keep your cool, Grant. This crowd loves confidence, not desperation. Across the ballroom, a hush began to ripple. Heads turned toward the grand staircase. Madison Hale was there. The light seemed to shift toward her, as if the room itself recognized who the real story was. She descended slowly, one hand resting on her growing belly, the other brushing the polished railing. Her gown was black velvet, sleek and simple, designed to command attention without begging for it. A single diamond necklace glimmered at her throat, the same one her husband had once given her, now returned to battle. But she wasn't alone. At her side walked Alexander Hale, the man Wall Street whispered about but rarely saw. In his tailored suit, he exuded the kind of quiet authority that made lesser men shrink. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned in, and within seconds the whispers turned to awe. Oh my God, that's her father. Alexander Hale? He's here? Whitmore's finished. Grant froze mid-sentence, his smirk collapsing. For the first time that night, he looked small, just another man out of his depth. Madison met his eyes across the room. Her expression was calm, unreadable. There was no anger, no tears, just a quiet, devastating poise. She didn't have to say a word. The silence between them screamed everything he'd thrown away. Victoria Whitmore, who had insisted on attending despite the scandal, turned pale. She wouldn't dare show her face here, she hissed. But Madison didn't just show her face. She owned the room. As she and Alexander approached the center of the ballroom, the event host rushed to greet them, microphone trembling slightly in his hand. Mr. Hale, Miss Hale, an honor to have you here this evening. Alexander nodded politely. We don't intend to stay long, just long enough to make an announcement. Grant's face drained of color. Announcement? He muttered. The host hesitated. Of course, Alexander's voice carried across the hall. Carter Holdings has officially completed its acquisition of Whitmore Holdings' remaining assets. The crowd gasped. Effective tomorrow, all divisions, shares, and properties will fall under Hale Industries. Grant's glass shattered against the floor. Victoria surged forward. You can't do this. This is extortion. Alexander turned to her, his tone as cold as the marble beneath them. No, Mrs. Whitmore. This is consequence. Madison stepped beside him, her gaze steady. And justice, she said softly. For every woman you silenced, every voice you crushed. Reporters swarmed. Cameras clicked like gunfire. Chloe took a step back, visibly shaken. Grant tried to speak, but his voice broke. Madison, please. She cut him off with a whisper that carried across the ballroom. You threw me out for giving life, and tonight I'm the reason your empire dies. The crowd erupted into murmurs. Alexander placed a protective hand on her shoulder. We're done here. As they turned to leave, Madison looked back one last time. Grant stood in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by flashing lights, but completely alone. And somewhere deep inside, he realized the cruelest punishment wasn't losing money. It was watching the woman he discarded rise higher than he'd ever reach again. The morning after the gala felt like the aftermath of an earthquake. Newspapers across New York screamed the same headline in bold black letters: Whitmore Empire collapses overnight, Carter Holdings seizes control. Stock tickers bled red across every major network. Television anchors repeated the story with incredulous excitement. Sources confirmed that Madison Hale, the estranged wife of Grant Whitmore, appeared at the plaza alongside her father, billionaire Alexander Hale, announcing the full acquisition of Whitmore Holdings following a federal investigation. The footage from the gala looped endlessly. The moment Madison walked down the stairs, Grant's shattered expression, Victoria's outrage, and Alexander's final, ice-cold declaration. The world watched the mighty fall, and they couldn't look away. Inside the penthouse, Madison sat quietly at the breakfast table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. The city outside glowed pale under the winter sun. Alexander stood by the window, phone in hand, coordinating lawyers, accountants, and publicists. When he finally hung up, he turned to her. "It's done," he said simply. "The Whitmores are bankrupt. The federal inquiry is official." Madison didn't smile. "So that's it? It's really over?" Alexander nodded. "Over. For them. For you, it's just beginning." Her eyes flickered toward the TV, where commentators dissected her every expression. "Some call her the Ice Queen of Wall Street," one said. "Others call her the woman who brought justice to the old money patriarchy." She sighed. "I didn't want to become a symbol." Alexander's voice softened. "You didn't choose it. It chose you." Meanwhile, across the East River, Grant sat alone in his stripped-down apartment, the penthouse already repossessed. The once proud CEO was now a broken figure in an undershirt, staring at eviction papers. His reflection in the window looked hollow, unshaven, unrecognizable. The phone on the counter buzzed. Unknown number. He answered out of habit. "Mr. Whitmore," the voice said coolly. "This is the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. We'd like to schedule a follow-up regarding your filings." Grant's mouth went dry. "You can't. This is a misunderstanding." The line went dead. He slumped into the chair, the weight of karma pressing down like lead. His empire, his wealth, his name, gone. All for the arrogance of believing he was untouchable. At the same moment, Chloe Reed stood outside a federal building downtown, clutching a folder. Inside were files, emails, bank transfers, invoices, proof of everything the Whitmores had done. She handed it to a journalist from the New York Times. "Just make sure the truth gets out," she said. The reporter looked up. "Why are you doing this?" Chloe gave a small, sad smile. "Because she never deserved what we did to her." By afternoon, the news had a new twist. Anonymous source confirms internal corruption. Whitmore family under criminal investigation. The downfall was complete. That evening, Madison walked through Central Park alone. The snow had started to fall, soft and slow, blanketing the city that had once mocked her pain. She stopped by the frozen lake, feeling the weight of silence. For the first time in months, she wasn't angry. She was free. A familiar voice called behind her. "You should be inside. It's freezing." She turned. A tall man in a dark coat approached, a face she recognized from one of her father's meetings. Nathan Cole, Carter Holdings general counsel and one of Alexander's most trusted allies. He handed her a scarf. "Your father sent me to make sure you're not out here plotting world domination alone." She laughed softly. "Maybe just a little." Nathan studied her for a moment. "You know, Madison, it's rare to see someone lose everything and come back stronger." "I didn't lose everything," she said, touching her belly. "I still have what matters." Snowflakes clung to her lashes as she smiled, tired, beautiful, reborn. Nathan hesitated, then offered his arm. "Dinner? Or do you have another empire to dismantle first?" Madison smiled wider. "Dinner sounds nice." As they walked toward the glowing city, her phone buzzed with a notification. Breaking. Whitmore family faces indictment. She slipped it back into her pocket. Some stories didn't need her attention anymore. Because the chapter that began with betrayal was ending in peace, and the woman they threw away was now untouchable. Days passed, but the storm Madison unleashed still rippled through Manhattan's power circles. Every newspaper headline, every business podcast, every investor meeting carried the same question. How did the Whitmore dynasty collapse so fast? The answer, whispered across Wall Street, was simple. Madison Hale. In the penthouse office of Carter Holdings, Madison sat before the panoramic view of New York City, dressed in a crisp white blouse and tailored blazer. Her father's chair, the one once seen as untouchable, was empty for the first time in decades. Alexander had gone to Washington for a Senate hearing, leaving Madison to oversee operations. The staff moved around her with quiet respect. Only weeks ago, many of them had seen her as the boss's daughter, a name cushioned in privilege. But now they looked at her differently, with the kind of wary admiration reserved for survivors who turn pain into authority. A soft knock came at the door. Nathan Cole stepped in, his expression composed but alert. "You're trending again," he said, placing a tablet on her desk. Madison raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, another op-ed calling me ruthless?" He smiled slightly. "Not this time. This one calls you the woman who changed the rules." She glanced at the headline, "From Victim to Vanguard, How Madison Hale Redefined Corporate Accountability." Beneath it, a photo of her from the gala, calm, poised, powerful. She leaned back, almost amused. "I didn't redefine anything. I just refused to stay quiet." Nathan studied her. "That's exactly what makes it revolutionary." Outside, snow drifted past the windows like falling ash. Madison stared out at the skyline, the city that had once broken her. "Do you think people really change, Nathan?" she asked quietly. He tilted his head. "Some evolve, others get exposed." She smiled faintly. "Then I guess the Whitmores were both." Across the East River, Grant Whitmore sat in a sterile interrogation room, his wrists cuffed loosely to the table. Federal investigators flipped through thick folders of evidence. The once polished CEO now looked hollow, a shadow of the man who had laughed her out of his life. "Mr. Whitmore," an agent said, "we have enough evidence to proceed with criminal charges, wire fraud, tax evasion, and falsified documentation." Grant stared at the table. "Can I make a deal?" he asked weakly. The agent glanced at his partner. "That depends. What do you have to offer?" Grant hesitated. "Information about the Whitmore accounts offshore, ones my mother controlled." The agents exchanged a knowing look. The walls were closing in. Meanwhile, Victoria Whitmore was packing her jewelry into velvet cases when the doorbell rang. Two federal marshals stood outside, warrant in hand. Her icy composure cracked as they read her rights. "You can't arrest me," she hissed. "I built this family." One marshal replied evenly, "And you destroyed it." By nightfall, both mother and son were booked. Their photos splashed across every major news outlet. At the same time, Madison sat quietly in her office, the city lights reflecting off her glass desk. Nathan entered again, holding 2 cups of coffee. "It's done," he said softly. "They're in custody." Madison didn't react immediately. She just exhaled, slow and heavy, as if releasing a decade of buried pain. "Then it's really over." Nathan nodded. "For them. For you, it's a new beginning." She turned to face him, her voice low but steady. "You know what's strange? I don't feel triumph. I just feel free." He smiled gently. "That's what justice feels like when it's clean." She looked down at the steaming coffee, then up at him. "Thank you, Nathan, for standing by me when no one else did." He shrugged. "You didn't need rescuing, Madison. You just needed reminding who you were." Outside, the snow stopped falling. The streets glowed gold under lamplight. Madison rose from her chair, gazing out over the city. "For the first time in years, I don't owe anyone anything. Not apology, not explanation, not pain." Nathan stepped closer. "Then let's build something new from that freedom." She smiled faintly. "Yes, something that lasts." And as Manhattan glimmered below, Madison Hale, the woman once discarded, realized she no longer lived in the shadow of power. She was the power. The following week, the city pulsed with whispers about Madison Hale. Business television hosts debated her next move, influencers quoted her speeches, and tabloids dissected every expression she wore in public. What had once been a scandal had transformed into a phenomenon. But Madison didn't feel like a phenomenon. She felt tired. Sitting on the terrace of the penthouse, she watched the gray Manhattan skyline fade beneath a winter sunset. The city looked quieter from above, almost peaceful, if you ignored the sound of her phone buzzing every few seconds. Interviews, speaking requests, investors eager to partner. Everyone wanted a piece of her story. Her father stepped outside, 2 glasses of water in hand instead of their usual wine. You look like someone who hasn't slept in days, Alexander said. Madison gave a small, weary smile. Sleep feels like a luxury lately. He sat beside her. You don't have to keep fighting now. You won. She shook her head. That's the thing, Dad. Winning feels hollow. Alexander studied her quietly. You thought justice would heal everything. I thought it would make me whole again, she admitted. But all I did was destroy what destroyed me. I didn't build anything new yet. Alexander nodded slowly, his gaze turning thoughtful. Then maybe it's time you build. He pulled out a thin envelope and placed it in front of her. Inside was a letter, handwritten, sealed with the Carter Holdings insignia. Madison opened it and froze. It was a transfer of ownership, 40% of Carter Holdings. Her name printed clearly beneath the words primary successor. Dad, what is this? She whispered. You're ready, Alexander said simply. You didn't just take revenge, you restored balance. That takes leadership, not rage. You've earned this. Madison's throat tightened. I don't know if I want it, he smiled faintly. That's exactly why you should have it. The ones who crave power don't deserve it. The ones who doubt it, those are the ones who lead wisely. Before she could respond, her phone rang again. Nathan's name lit up the screen. She answered. Nathan? His voice came through, low but urgent. You should turn on Channel 7. Madison grabbed the remote. The television flickered to life, revealing live coverage outside the federal courthouse. Reporters swarmed as Grant Whitmore exited in handcuffs, cameras flashing like lightning. Behind him, Victoria was escorted by marshals, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. The anchor's voice filled the room. Breaking, Grant and Victoria Whitmore formally charged with securities fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. Sources confirm full cooperation from an anonymous insider believed to be Chloe Reed. Madison's heart clenched, not from pity, but from the strange ache of closure. It's over, she whispered. Nathan's voice softened on the line. No, Madison. It's over for them. You're just beginning. She hung up, setting the phone aside. The room fell quiet except for the hum of the city below. Her father rose, straightening his jacket. You should rest, Maddie. Tomorrow's announcement will change everything. What announcement? She asked. He smiled mysteriously. The world needs to know the next leader of Carter Holdings. I'll make it official at the shareholders' dinner. Madison's pulse quickened. You're going to name me? He nodded. It's your legacy now. As night fell, Madison stood by the window, her reflection merging with the city lights. For the first time, she didn't see the woman who was thrown out, humiliated, or betrayed. She saw an heir, a builder, a protector. She whispered softly to the tiny heartbeat within her, You'll never be told you're not enough. Not while I'm here. And somewhere below, in the city that had once crushed her, a new empire quietly began to rise. One led by a woman who had learned that real power isn't inherited, it's earned. The morning of the Carter Holdings shareholders' dinner arrived with the kind of tension that clung to the air before a thunderstorm. Madison stood in her dressing room, her reflection framed by soft golden light. The black silk gown she wore was understated yet commanding, its clean lines whispering power rather than shouting it. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was dressing to prove anything. Tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about legacy. Her father entered, already in his classic charcoal suit, tie perfectly knotted, expression unreadable. You look like your mother, he said quietly. Madison smiled faintly. She would have told me to add earrings. She'd also tell you not to let anyone mistake kindness for weakness. He handed her a small box. Inside lay a pair of diamond studs, her mother's. Wear them, he said. They remind people that grace can be sharper than steel. As they rode together in the black Mercedes through the city, flashbulbs already burst outside the Park Hyatt, where the dinner was held. The invitation-only event drew every major investor, journalist, and political figure within 200 miles. Everyone wanted to witness the return of Alexander Hale and his daughter, the new power duo of Manhattan finance. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers shimmered, glasses clinked, and whispers followed them wherever they went. There she is. That's Madison Hale, the one who took down the Whitmores. She felt every eye on her, but this time she didn't shrink from it. She met the gaze of every person who once looked through her and smiled as if she already owned the room. Because, in a way, she did. At the main table, Alexander stood to speak first. The crowd hushed instantly. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice rich and steady, Carter Holdings has always stood for strength through integrity, but tonight I want to talk about renewal, about the power that comes from rebuilding after destruction. He turned toward his daughter. I built this company to last beyond me, and tonight I name its future. A collective breath swept through the room. Madison felt her pulse quicken. Alexander smiled, not at the crowd but at her. Please welcome the new Chief Executive Officer of Carter Holdings, Madison Hale. The applause that followed was thunderous. Cameras flashed. Investors rose to their feet. Madison froze for a split second, then stood, every nerve alive. She walked to the podium as her father stepped back, pride glinting in his eyes. The microphone hummed softly as she leaned forward. Thank you, she began, her voice calm yet resonant. A year ago, I was sitting in a different room, signing away a marriage and a decade of my life. I thought I'd lost everything, but sometimes losing everything is what sets you free. The room fell silent. She looked out at the sea of faces, some supportive, some skeptical. I learned that legacy isn't about bloodlines or last names. It's about courage, the courage to do what's right when it's hardest. She paused, letting her words hang in the air. Carter Holdings will lead differently. We'll stand for transparency, for accountability, for people over power. Because the real empire isn't built in boardrooms, it's built in the lives we change. The applause this time was different, softer, more sincere. Even the reporters lowered their cameras to listen. When she stepped off the stage, Nathan was waiting near the edge of the crowd. You are extraordinary, he whispered. She smiled, her heartbeat still racing. I didn't plan any of it. That's what made it real. Across the ballroom, Alexander watched quietly, the faintest trace of a tear glinting before he blinked it away. He turned to one of his advisors and said, My daughter just became the future of this city. And for the first time in her life, Madison Hale didn't feel like she was standing in anyone's shadow. She was the light, and the world had finally turned to see her shine. The morning after Madison's appointment as CEO, New York City pulsed with a rare kind of electricity. Every major newspaper and financial outlet splashed her image across their front pages. From divorce to dynasty, Madison Hale takes the helm. It should have been the beginning of peace, the start of her new chapter. But Madison knew better. Power never came without ghosts. She sat in her new office, her father's old one, on the top floor of Carter Tower. The skyline stretched endlessly before her, the glass reflecting a woman who had learned to turn pain into armor. Yet even armor had cracks. Her fingers traced the edge of a photo on her desk, her wedding day, the moment before the lies began. The intercom buzzed. Miss Hale, there's someone here asking to see you, her assistant said. I told you, no walk-ins, Madison replied. I know, ma'am, but she says it's urgent. Her name is Chloe Reed. Madison froze. The name cut through her like a blade. Send her in. The doors opened, and Chloe stepped inside. Gone was the glittering PR girl with champagne confidence. The woman standing before her now was pale, composed, and trembling just enough to betray fear. She wore a simple beige coat, her makeup understated. For the first time, Chloe looked human. Madison, she said softly, you look different. Madison folded her hands, her tone cool. Being betrayed tends to do that to a person. Chloe exhaled. I deserve that. But I came to tell you something. Make it quick. Chloe reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive, placing it on the desk between them. This contains the last of the Whitmore accounts, offshore funds your ex-husband and his mother kept hidden. It's proof of full embezzlement. Madison eyed it, but didn't reach for it. Why give this to me? You already turned on them once. Because they turned on me too, Chloe said, her voice shaking. Victoria promised protection, but when things fell apart, she framed me for the falsified invoices. The only reason I'm not in prison is because your father's lawyers intervened indirectly through the investigation. Madison leaned back, studying her. And now you want redemption? Chloe's eyes glistened. No, I want forgiveness. Silence filled the office. The only sound was the muted hum of traffic 30 floors below. Madison finally spoke, her voice steady but sharp. Forgiveness isn't a currency you can trade, Chloe. But this, she nodded at the flash drive. This helps. Chloe lowered her gaze. I'm leaving New York, starting over somewhere nobody knows my name. Good, Madison said softly. Start over as someone better. When Chloe left, Madison sat alone for a long moment, staring at the drive. She plugged it into her laptop, the screen filling with documents, statements, and wire transfers that confirmed everything. The Whitmore scandal was deeper than anyone imagined. Nathan entered just as she was scanning the files. "You're not resting, are you?" She smiled faintly. "Apparently justice doesn't sleep." He stepped closer, reading the screen. "That's damning. The Department of Justice will eat this alive." "Good," she said. "Let them." As Nathan looked at her, something in his gaze shifted, admiration mixed with concern. "You're incredible, Madison, but be careful. The higher you rise, the more people will try to pull you down." She met his eyes. "Then I'll learn to fly higher." Outside, the city roared beneath them, sirens, horns, ambition, and fear. Madison closed her laptop and stood by the window, the fading sun painting her reflection in gold. In that moment, she realized forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was freedom. And as the Whitmore's empire burned to ashes, Madison Hale finally began to build her own. The next morning, Carter Tower was alive with motion. Journalists camped outside, investors buzzed through the lobby, and inside the glass boardrooms, Madison Hale's name carried the weight of a storm. She'd been CEO for less than 48 hours, and yet her face was everywhere. On business networks, front pages, even trending hashtags. But beneath the polished surface of power, she felt something else stirring. Exhaustion, unease, the faint whisper of a threat she couldn't name. Nathan Cole stepped into her office, his tie loosened, his face tight. "We have a problem," he said. Madison looked up from her laptop. "Define problem." He placed a file on her desk, confidential, marked in red. "Someone leaked internal Carter emails to the press. Anonymous source. It looks like they're trying to frame us for insider trading connected to the Whitmore collapse." Madison's pulse quickened. "That's impossible. We did everything legally. Who would?" "Someone inside," Nathan interrupted. "Maybe one of the old Whitmore associates still on payroll. The story's not public yet, but if it leaks, it'll taint everything you've built." She rose from her chair, crossing to the window where the skyline glittered like glass blades. "After everything, they're still trying to destroy me." Nathan watched her carefully. "You've changed the game, Madison, and when you change the game, you make enemies." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she turned, her voice calm but lethal. "Then we find them before they find us." Meanwhile, in a dimly lit apartment across town, a man hunched over a laptop, his face illuminated by the glow of the screen. The file transfers blinked. "Confidential data sent." He smirked. On his wrist glimmered a gold watch, engraved with fading initials. G.W. Grant Whitmore wasn't finished. The scandal had taken everything from him, his empire, his reputation, his freedom. But even under indictment, he'd found a way to crawl out of the wreckage. He'd sold the last of his assets, paid off a minor clerk at a hedge fund, and now, from the shadows, he planned to take down the woman who had taken everything from him. "She thinks she's untouchable," he muttered. Clicking send. "Let's see her survive this." Back at Carter Tower, Nathan's phone buzzed. He checked it, frowning. "Madison, you need to see this." She turned toward the massive television on the wall. A live broadcast flashed across the screen, an anchor speaking with feigned neutrality. "Breaking news. New allegations have surfaced, suggesting insider trading within Carter Holdings during the collapse of Whitmore Industries. Sources claim emails implicate newly appointed CEO Madison Hale." Her blood ran cold. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Those documents, they're forged." Nathan nodded grimly. "But perception moves faster than truth." Her assistant burst into the room. "Ma'am, the stock is dropping, 10% in the last 15 minutes. Alexander Hale's voice thundered through the speakerphone a second later. "Maddie, stay calm. We'll handle this." But she wasn't calm. She was furious. "Dad," she said, gripping the edge of her desk, "this isn't just business. This is war." That evening, as the city darkened, Madison met Nathan in the private conference room. "We traced the leak," she said. "Every IP address, every digital signature. I don't care what it takes." Nathan hesitated. "If Grant's behind this, and I think he is, you'll have to face him again." Her jaw tightened. "Then let him come. He wanted a war. I'll give him one." Outside, thunder rolled over Manhattan, mirroring the chaos brewing within. On a cracked screen across town, Grant watched the news and smiled as Carter's stock ticker flashed red. He lifted his glass of whiskey and whispered, "Your turn to fall, Madison." But what Grant didn't know was that Madison Hale had already prepared for the storm. And this time, she wasn't the one about to break. Rain lashed against the glass walls of Carter Tower as Madison paced her office like a caged lion. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one unfolding within the markets. In less than 12 hours, Carter Holdings had lost 15% of its stock value. Headlines screamed words like corruption, insider trading, and fraud. She could almost feel the eyes of Wall Street watching, waiting for her to fall. Nathan Cole entered, phone in hand, his usual composure fraying. "Madison, we traced the digital breach. It came through a proxy server in Brooklyn, but it's messy. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." "Grant," Madison said coldly. "It has to be him." Nathan nodded. "Maybe, but he's not working alone. Someone inside is feeding him information." Madison turned toward the window, her reflection fractured by streaks of rain. "Then we find the traitor, tonight." He hesitated. "You haven't slept in 2 days. Let me handle this." She shook her head. "This isn't just a data leak, Nathan. This is my life, my child's future, my father's legacy. I'm not sitting this one out." The clock ticked past midnight. The two of them sat side by side in the dim conference room, surrounded by screens filled with cascading lines of code and internal message logs. Madison's eyes burned, but her focus didn't waver. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to an anomaly. "That IP. It's rerouted through an old employee login, finance division." Nathan zoomed in. "Employee ID 2941B. That's..." He stopped. Madison frowned. "That's who?" "Clara Whitmore." Madison's blood ran cold. Victoria's niece, the quiet one who had stayed on after the takeover, claiming she wanted to rebuild her life. Madison had trusted her. "She's the leak," Madison whispered. Nathan straightened. "Do you want me to call security?" "No," Madison said slowly, her voice sharp with resolve. "I'll handle this myself." An hour later, Clara was escorted into Madison's office, soaked from the rain, trembling. "Miss Hale, I can explain." Madison sat behind her desk, the lights dimmed to a soft glow. Her tone was calm, but her eyes were lethal. "You sold information to Grant Whitmore." Clara shook her head frantically. "No. He blackmailed me. He said if I didn't send him data, he'd expose my family, my mother's debts." "Stop," Madison interrupted. "You made a choice." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted it to stop." Madison leaned forward. "Do you still have contact with him?" Clara nodded weakly. "He's in a warehouse near the docks. He said he's planning something bigger, a final move to destroy you." Nathan, standing near the door, exchanged a look with Madison. "This could be a setup," he warned. Madison's lips curved into something halfway between anger and resolve. "Then let's walk right into it." 3 hours later, the rain had turned to fog as a black sedan pulled up near the Brooklyn waterfront. Madison stepped out first, her heels clicking against the wet pavement. Nathan closed behind. Inside the warehouse, the air smelled of rust and desperation. Grant Whitmore waited among stacks of crates, his once polished demeanor reduced to fury. "You shouldn't have come," he said, voice thick with resentment. "You think you've won? You stole everything from me." Madison met his gaze. "No, Grant, you threw everything away when you traded your soul for greed." He laughed bitterly. "You think you're clean? You're just your father's daughter, born into corruption." She took another step closer, unflinching. "Maybe, but unlike you, I don't hide from my choices." Before Grant could respond, Nathan hit a switch on his phone. Hidden cameras lit up red. Madison's voice was calm as she said, "You're confessing on federal record, Grant. Everything you just said, your crimes, your lies, it's over." Grant's face twisted in shock. "You set me up?" She smiled coldly. "No, you set yourself up." Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. And as Grant Whitmore was taken away in handcuffs once more, Madison realized this wasn't just revenge, it was closure written in justice, sealed by truth. The morning after Grant's arrest broke like a cleansing wind over Manhattan. For the first time in months, the headlines no longer screamed chaos, they whispered consequence. Disgraced CEO Grant Whitmore arrested in sting operation. Carter Holdings clears name, gains market confidence. But while the world celebrated her triumph, Madison Hale felt no victory, only the quiet hum of exhaustion that follows survival. She sat in her father's office, the faint light of dawn spilling across the polished wood. The city below stirred awake, unaware that history had shifted again overnight. Nathan entered with 2 coffees, the familiar warmth in his voice breaking the silence. You did it, he said softly. It's over. Madison accepted the cup, her hands steady, but her eyes distant. No, Nathan, it's never really over. Every victory costs something. He tilted his head. What did this one cost you? She looked toward the skyline, where clouds bruised the edge of the morning. A little more of my peace. Before Nathan could respond, her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. She opened it cautiously. One sentence appeared. You may have caught him, but you'll never escape what he left behind. Madison's blood ran cold. Who sent it? Nathan asked, already moving closer. She handed him the phone. No name, no number trace. Nathan's expression hardened. Could be one of Whitmore's old partners, thought Rizzi. They might still be holding accounts he controlled. Or it's another threat, Madison said, forcing her voice to stay calm. Either way, I'm not letting them scare me again. Nathan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Then we finish this properly. We dig until there's nothing left of his empire. Across the East River, in a luxury holding cell meant for white-collar criminals, Grant Whitmore sat on the edge of his cot, his hands shaking. His lawyers had abandoned him. His mother was gone, facing trial herself in D.C. He had nothing left but bitterness and a single photograph he'd stolen from the gala. Madison, radiant under the chandelier light. He stared at it, fury twisting his face. She thinks she's won, he muttered, but every empire rots from within. That afternoon, Madison returned to Carter Tower for a board meeting. The conference room was filled with whispers and congratulatory smiles. Investors applauded her decisive leadership. Stock prices had rebounded. Carter Holdings was stronger than ever, yet beneath the applause, something in Madison felt uneasy. Her father sat beside her, serene but calculating. Enjoy the calm, Maddie, he said, because storms always return. She looked at him curiously. You think there's another one coming? He gave a knowing smile. In business, there always is. Later, as she left the tower, a courier approached her in the lobby. Delivery for Miss Hale, he said, handing her a small black envelope. She frowned. No sender, no logo. Inside was a USB drive and a note written in neat, unfamiliar handwriting, for the truth that hasn't been told. Nathan caught up to her outside. What's that? I don't know, she said, but we're not opening it here. That night, back at the penthouse, they plugged the drive into a secure laptop. A folder appeared. Carter Whitmore legacy files. Madison clicked it open and froze. Inside were old documents predating her marriage. Financial transfers between Carter Holdings and Whitmore Industries, all signed by Alexander Hale. Nathan's eyes widened. Your father was funding them years before you married Grant? Madison's voice faltered. No, that can't be right. He told me. He said he didn't know. The color drained from her face. She scrolled further. Emails, agreements, contracts. The partnership wasn't accidental. It was strategic. Her marriage had been part of a financial alliance orchestrated long before love ever entered the equation. Nathan whispered, Madison, your father didn't just help destroy Whitmore. He helped build it. The realization struck like lightning. Her father hadn't saved her from the Whitmores. He'd been the one who tied her to them in the first place. Madison stared at the screen, the truth unraveling everything she thought she knew. And for the first time, the woman who had mastered every battle realized her next war would be against blood. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, like the sky itself was burdened by secrets. Madison barely slept. The flash drive lay on her desk, the folder still open, proof that her father, Alexander Hale, the man who had rescued her, had also once empowered the Whitmores. The irony was unbearable. The savior and the sinner were the same. Nathan arrived early, carrying 2 coffees. His usual calm confidence was replaced by quiet worry. You didn't sleep, he said, studying her face. Madison didn't look up. I didn't want to. He set the coffee down gently beside her. You need to confront him. She finally turned toward him, eyes red-rimmed but fierce. I don't even know what to say. He lied to me, Nathan. My whole marriage, my humiliation was built on a deal he made. Nathan hesitated. You can't be sure he knew what Grant would become. Madison snapped. He knew enough to fund them, to build the very empire that nearly destroyed me. She stood abruptly, pacing toward the window. He didn't save me out of love, Nathan. He saved his investment. Silence hung in the room. Outside? The city shimmered under thin winter light, beautiful, unfeeling. Finally, Nathan said, maybe it's time you asked for the truth. That evening, Alexander returned from a business trip to Washington. The moment he stepped into the penthouse, Madison was waiting for him. She stood in the living room, the flash drive clutched in her hand like a loaded weapon. "Madison," he greeted warmly, removing his gloves. "You look." "Don't," she interrupted. Her voice was sharp, cold. "Don't pretend everything's fine." He froze, the faintest flicker of unease crossing his face. "What's wrong?" She walked toward him and dropped the flash drive on the table. That's what's wrong." He stared at it, then back at her. "Where did you get that?" "It doesn't matter," she said. "What matters is what it proves." Alexander's expression remained unreadable. "You've seen it." "Yes," she spat. "You financed Whitmore Industries years ago. You partnered with them, the same people who threw me into the street like garbage, the same man who—" Her voice broke. "You knew, didn't you? You knew what they were." Alexander exhaled slowly, removing his glasses. "I knew who they were," he said quietly, "but I didn't know what they would do to you." "That's not good enough," Madison snapped. "You built them, Dad. You gave them power." His voice hardened. "I did it for business. The Whitmores controlled crucial infrastructure, and I needed their shipping contracts. It was never personal." "Never personal?" she repeated, disbelief turning to fury. "You made me personal collateral. My marriage was your alliance." Alexander's silence was answer enough. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You used me." "I protected you," he said firmly. "When they turned on you, I destroyed them." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You cleaned up your own mess." He stepped closer. "Everything I did was for our family." "Family doesn't manipulate," she whispered. "Family doesn't sacrifice love for leverage." He sighed, tired, proud, unbending. "You've always been emotional, Madison. That's your weakness." She met his gaze with pure steel. "And your weakness is thinking emotion makes people weak." Nathan, who had stood silently near the doorway, finally spoke. "Mr. Hale, you should leave her alone tonight." Alexander's eyes flicked to him, cold and assessing. "You think you can protect her from the truth? The world isn't built on feelings, Mr. Cole. It's built on power." Madison stepped between them. "Then maybe it's time someone tore that world down." Her father studied her for a long moment, then nodded once, slow, deliberate. "Be careful what you wish for, Madison. You're my daughter, and power always leaves blood on its hands." He walked out, the echo of his footsteps slicing through the silence. Nathan touched her shoulder gently. "You okay?" She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the door. Because deep down, Madison Hale knew this was no longer a war against the Whitmores. It was a reckoning against her own blood and the empire that made her who she was. The following days passed like a storm that refused to end. Madison barely spoke to her father. She went through her duties at Carter Holdings with perfect professionalism. Board meetings, investor calls, public statements. But beneath that polished calm, she was unraveling. Every decision she made felt tainted by his shadow. Every success carried the echo of his manipulation. Nathan noticed. He always did. One night, after another 12-hour day, he found her alone in the boardroom, the city lights flickering against the glass walls. "You can't keep this up," he said gently. Madison didn't look up. "If I stop moving, I'll start thinking." He leaned against the doorway. "Then maybe you need to think. You found out your father built the empire you destroyed. That's not something you just bury." She finally looked at him, her eyes cold but tired. "If I let this consume me, I'll become him." Nathan walked closer, voice steady. "You're not him. You care. That's what separates you." She wanted to believe that. But the truth gnawed at her. Somewhere deep down, she could feel her father's ruthlessness stirring in her blood. The next morning, she received an encrypted email. The subject line read, "He's selling it all." When she opened it, her heart dropped. Attached was a contract. Alexander Hale negotiating a private sale of his shares in Carter Holdings to a foreign conglomerate. If finalized, it would shift control of the company away from her entirely. "Dad," she muttered under her breath, fury rising like fire. She stormed into his office without knocking. He was on the phone, his voice calm, rehearsed, the tone of a man who had always expected obedience. "End the call," she said sharply. He glanced at her, annoyed. "Madison, not now." "Now," she demanded. He hung up slowly, folding his hands. "You're angry. I assume you saw the deal. You're selling Carter Holdings? My company? After everything?" He leaned back, unfazed. "Our company. And yes, consolidation is necessary. The global market is shifting. Don't, she snapped. Don't turn this into business jargon. This isn't about the market. This is about control. He sighed. You're emotional again. Her laugh was sharp, bitter. You keep saying that like it's an insult. You built an empire on cold logic, and all it did was destroy every life it touched. He stood, towering over her, his voice low and deliberate. You wouldn't have this power without me. Don't rewrite history. You are where you are because I made you strong. Her voice cracked, but not from weakness. No, I am where I am because I survived you. For the first time, Alexander's composure faltered. Be careful, Madison. You're walking a dangerous line. She stepped closer, meeting his eyes without flinching. So are you. A long silence filled the room, thick as glass. Then she spoke quietly, each word cutting like a blade. If you go through with that sale, I'll expose everything. Every deal, every offshore account, every manipulation. You think the Whitmore's downfall was brutal? Wait until you see what happens when the world learns that the great Alexander Hale built his fortune on deceit. His expression hardened. You wouldn't dare. She smiled coldly. Try me. That evening, Madison met Nathan in a quiet cafe near Central Park. The snow was falling again, soft and relentless. He studied her face, reading the exhaustion and fire mixed behind her calm. You confronted him. Yes, she said, staring out the window. And now I think I've started a war I might not win. Nathan reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. Then don't fight it alone this time. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not pity but partnership. Someone who believed in her, not her name. Madison exhaled slowly, a small, tired smile forming. No more running, she said. If my father wants a war, I'll end it the same way I ended the last one, on my terms. Outside, the snow fell heavier, coating the city in white. And somewhere high above, Alexander Hale stood by his office window, watching the same snowfall, whispering to himself, let her fight. That's how she becomes unstoppable. Snow blanketed Manhattan in silence, muting the chaos that had defined Madison Hale's life for months. But inside Carter Tower, war was brewing. The boardroom glowed under the cold fluorescent lights as Madison stood at the head of the table, her expression calm, but her pulse racing. Every director in the room looked uneasy. On the screen behind her, the words "Proposed Sale of Carter Holdings Shares, Alexander Hale" gleamed like a verdict. Her father sat at the opposite end of the table, immaculate as always, navy suit, silver cufflinks, posture that radiated command. Let's not dramatize this, Alexander said smoothly. This sale is strategic. It ensures Carter's stability in an evolving market. Madison's voice was steady but sharp. No, it ensures your control. After you've already manipulated every piece on the board. You built the Whitmores to serve your ambitions, and now you're doing it again. I won't let you sacrifice people's lives for another empire. A murmur rippled through the directors. Nathan, seated beside her, placed a discreet hand on the table, a silent reminder to stay calm. Alexander smiled thinly. You forget, Madison. Carter Holdings exists because I created it. You inherited my name, not my wisdom. Her jaw tightened. And you forget that the company survived because I rebuilt it when your choices almost destroyed it. He leaned forward, his tone icy. Don't mistake temporary sympathy for success. You're emotional. You lead with your heart, not your head. That's why you'll fail. She took a step closer. Then maybe failure is what this company needs, because I'd rather lead with heart than rule with fear. The room fell silent. For a long moment, father and daughter stared each other down, the air thick with tension. Finally, Madison turned toward the board. Gentlemen, the future of Carter Holdings belongs to its people, not to power plays or old egos. If this sale proceeds, I resign, effective immediately. The directors gasped. Alexander's expression darkened. You wouldn't dare walk away from everything we've built. She smiled sadly. You built this empire to own it. I rebuilt it to free it. Nathan stood, his voice calm but firm. For the record, I second her stance. If Madison leaves, half this board will follow. The investors trust her, not you. Alexander's hands clenched. You think loyalty will protect you? The market doesn't care about morality. Madison met his gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. No, but people do. The silence stretched until one of the older directors cleared his throat. Mr. Hale, with respect, the vote must be unanimous for the sale to proceed. And you've just lost it. Alexander looked around the room, realizing the truth. The empire he'd built through decades of ruthless precision had just been taken apart by his own daughter's conviction. He stood slowly, his voice low and deliberate. "You've learned well, Madison. Maybe too well." She met his eyes. "You taught me power. I just gave it meaning." With that, she turned and walked out, the board following her lead. Hours later, she stood on the terrace of the penthouse, the city lights glittering below. Nathan joined her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "You did it," he said softly. Madison exhaled, her breath clouding in the cold air. "I didn't want to win. I just wanted peace." He smiled gently. "Maybe they're the same thing." She turned to him, the snow light glinting off her face. "No," she said. "Peace has a price. And today, I finally paid it." They stood there in silence, watching the city pulse beneath them. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, a reminder that justice was never quiet. Madison rested a hand on her stomach, feeling her daughter move. "She'll grow up knowing that strength doesn't mean cruelty," she whispered. Nathan nodded. "And that sometimes, walking away is the greatest victory." As snow continued to fall, Madison Hale, once cast out, once broken, finally felt the weight lift from her shoulders. She had faced betrayal, loss, and truth itself. And in the end, she hadn't just survived the world her father built, she had rewritten it. Trelevit contentio vu king eldanoi. So, that's how our story ends. But if you're still here, my friend, still watching, still listening, it means something inside this story touched your heart, even just a little. Maybe it reminded you that strength isn't about power, it's about peace. Madison's journey showed us that sometimes we have to lose everything, not to be destroyed, but to discover who we truly are. There's a quote from the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius that says, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's what Madison learned. She couldn't change what others did to her, but she could choose how to rise from it. And that's what healing really is. It's not forgetting the pain, it's growing strong enough to stand beside it without fear. So if you're standing in your own storm right now, remember, your peace is your power. You don't have to fight the world to win. Sometimes you just have to refuse to let it break you. If this story meant something to you, take a moment, like, share, and subscribe. Because maybe, just maybe, you and I, we're both still learning how to rise.